Welcome to Animal Cognition, Lecture 7, Part 1. In this lecture, what we're going to be doing is examining higher level cognitive abilities, in particular whether animals can reason analogically. So to get at the topic whether animals can engage in analogical reasoning, we're going to begin by examining what's involved in human analogical reasoning. And what we're going to see from that discussion is that what's essential to human analogical reasoning is the ability to map relations, right? So it involves mapping between domains in terms of relationships between objects in each domain. So the way that it works is that we see that the relationships between certain objects in this domain are the same, right? The relationship is the same as the relationship between objects in another domain. And I'll explain more about what that means. So this highlights the important question as to whether animals can identify relationships between relationships. Can they see that this relationship here is the same as this relationship over there? And if they can reason about relationships in this way, then that would be evidence for the third level that Morgan talks about, right? The ability to reason. So for Morgan, as we saw, there's instinct, there's intelligence or trial and error learning, and then there's reasoning, which he talks about involving the ability to process relationships. So let's start with what's involved in analogical reasoning. So analogical reasoning basically involves transferring information from one domain, called the source, to another domain that's referred to as the target. And quite often these two domains are superficially very different, right? So the objects in the domains look very different. And analogical reasoning is obviously central to a lot of human cognition, right? Through analogical reasoning, we're able to extend our knowledge. What we know about one domain, we transfer to other domains. So for example, when we're trying to understand the structure of the atom, we use as an analogy the structure of the solar system, where less massive objects revolve around a more massive object, in particular the sun. So we use that structure to help us understand the flow of electrons around the nucleus. And analogical reasoning isn't just limited to science. Children often use analogies to help them understand the world. Lawyers often argue cases based on past precedent. So they say that the judgments in this case are similar to the judgments in that case, so the reasoning should apply. All right, so the way that we summarize this is by saying that through analogy we can apply what we know about one domain to help us to understand another domain. And importantly for humans, analogies make use of our ability to represent relations between relations. Right, we can see that the relationship here is the same as the relationship there. Right, so most analogies that people use are at the level of the relationships between objects and not in terms of the attributes of the objects, right? What the specific objects look like in each domain. So for example, to take our solar system and atom analogy, the relationship between planets and the sun is similar to the relationship between electrons and the nucleus, right? So X revolves around Y would be the common relationship. But obviously the attributes of atoms and subatomic particles and the attributes of planets are very different. But the relationships are the same. And that's what we care about when we think about analogies, right? It's not the attributes, it's the relations. So when people interpret analogies, they do so by taking into account their common relationships. And they tend to discount the fact, right? They think of it as irrelevant that the two domains are superficially very different. So one of the classic demonstrations of this in the case of humans is a study by Markman and Gentner. So in their studies they used two pictures, picture A and picture B, and one of the objects in picture A was a cross-mapped object. And what this means is that that object in picture A could either be mapped onto an object in picture B based on common attributes, or it could be mapped onto a different object in picture B based on the fact that it plays the same role in a higher order relationship. So let's take a concrete example here. So we have picture A on the top, picture B on the bottom, and the cross-mapped object is the woman in picture A. Why is she a cross-mapped object? Because you can map her onto the woman in picture B, which would be mapping on the basis of common features, right, common attributes, or you could map her onto the picture, onto an object in picture B based on the role that she plays in a relationship. If you look at picture A, you can see that the role that she plays in a relationship is being the recipient of food. So if the relationship is important, right, and the role that things play in their relationships, if that's what's important to analogy, then what object would she be mapped on in picture B? Right? The answer is the squirrel. Okay, so we have two choices: mapping on the basis of attributes, or playing a similar role in a relationship. So which object in B corresponds to the woman in A? When people do this, they map the woman in A onto the squirrel in B. So they overwhelmingly have a preference for mapping her onto the squirrel. Why? Because she plays the same role, being the recipient of food in A, and the squirrel is the recipient of food in B. Okay, so mapping on the basis of relations is essential, right? It's at the heart of human analogical reasoning. So it involves seeing that one set of relationships, right, one relationship between objects in one domain is the same as a relationship in another domain, even if it looks very different. So if we're going to study analogical reasoning in animals, we need to make that a kind of a concrete thing, right? How are we going to study that? And the way that animal cognition researchers have pursued it is by seeing whether animals can map relations between two domains. Right? So can animals reason analogically by mapping relations between two domains? So the student might remember that we've talked about animals being able to map on the basis of similarity and map on the basis of difference, right? So we know that many animals can identify objects that are the same and objects that are different. And we saw that with the honeybees, bumblebees, pigeons, rhesus monkeys, and so on. And this was demonstrated using a match sample and match non-match sample tasks. Right. So a bee shown a yellow disc, for example, can identify when given a choice point between a yellow disc and a blue disc. If she has to find the same one, she'll choose the yellow disc. And if the task is to find a different one, if she sees a yellow disc, she'll choose the blue disc. All right, but these tasks that we've already discussed are really first order relationships, right? They describe the relationship between individual objects. This object is the same as that, or this object is different than that. But for analogical reasoning, as we saw, we need more than that. Right? We have to go beyond mapping on the basis of similar attributes. Right? And we have to see whether animals can map on the basis of similar relationships. So what I'm getting at is there's a difference between saying this object is the same as that object and saying this relationship between objects is the same as that relationship between objects. So those would be second order relationships, right? They're relationships about relationships. right? This relationship is the same as that relationship, or this relationship is different from that relationship. So I know that this is all very abstract, but as we go through this and we discuss lots of examples, you'll see that it really is quite simple once you get the hang of it. All right, so much of the work that's been done on relational mapping has been done with primates, including monkeys and apes, but as we'll see in the second part, there's also been some work done with avian species. And most of the studies have been done using what's called the relational match-to-sample task. So the first study that I want to talk about is by Oden, Thompson, and Premack. The sample, right? So what the animals have to look at, and this was done with chimpanzees. The sample consisted of two objects, and the objects were either the same or they were different, right? So we used letters to stand for the two objects. So the objects are either the same or different, and then the choice stimuli would be two pairs of objects, and the objects are either the same or the objects are different. So CC would be two same objects, CD would be two different objects. So in a relationship, in a relational match-to-sample task, they have to look at the relationship between the sample objects, and they have to find, and they have to choose, at the choice point, they have to choose the two stimuli that have the same relationship. So if the sample had two same objects, they had to choose the set with two same objects. And if the sample had two different objects, at the choice point they had to choose the set with two different objects, because that would be matching the relationship. So they have to identify the relationship present in the sample, and they have to choose the matching relationship in the choice stimuli. So I think a picture would help to make this more concrete. So as you can see here, on the left side, the sample is two circles. So the relationship there is same. So the choice point, they have two triangles, or a triangle and a rectangle. So which of those has the same relationship as the sample? Obviously the two triangles. Now if we turn to the right, and we look at the sample, we see that the relationship between the two sample stimuli is different, right? They're not the same. Right, so sample set 2, the relationship between the two objects is difference. So at the choice point, which relationship or which object do they, which set do they have to choose? They have to choose the two that are different, right? Because that would match the sample relationship. So the objects that Oden and colleagues used were a bottle cap, a piece of hose, a chain links, plastic block, piece of wood, metal bracket, right? So the sample would be made up of two of these objects, and the choices would also be made up of these objects. So they weren't able to train the chimpanzees to select the set of items that had a matching relationship to the sample. Right, so they failed, right? So when they're shown a sample, at the choice point, the chimpanzees seem to choose randomly. And this suggests that chimpanzees are not able to represent relations between relations. So maybe that ability is limited to humans. But what if you teach these animals a symbol? Right, this is called language training. What if you teach them a symbol for sameness and a symbol for difference? Right, so when a chimpanzee has a symbol for sameness and a symbol for difference, it's able to encode this abstract relationship that exists between the two stimuli in a concrete way. Right, and this might facilitate it. Right, so based on this training, they can see what relationship is present in the sample, right, and they can think about it in a concrete way. And then when they're presented with the two choices, the two sets of choices, they can represent the relationships in the two choices in a concrete way by thinking of this symbol, and then they just have to match the symbols. Right, so this makes thinking about relationships and matching them a lot easier. So let's say that you taught a chimpanzee that a certain geometric pattern stands for same, and that a certain other pattern, geometric pattern, stands for different. Right? So I have the two symbols here as an example. So when they see the sample, in this case the triangle and the circle, right, they'd be able to think of a concrete symbol, mainly the different symbol. And then when they're presented with the choices, right, the one on the left, they would think of the sameness symbol, and the one on the right, they would think of the different symbol. And then they would have to remember what symbol they activated when they saw the sample, and they could match accordingly. So in this case, the two different symbols would be the same. So that's the one that they would choose. So Washburn, Thompson, and Oden, they trained macaque monkeys and chimpanzees to use symbols for same and different. And they did so by rewarding them for choosing a circle when they were shown two objects that were the same, and by rewarding them for choosing a triangle when they were shown two objects that were different. Right, so they kept doing this until they were accurate at categorizing the relationship. So circle stands for sameness, and triangle stands for difference. And these become symbols that the chimpanzees and monkeys can think about while they're doing the tasks. So after mastering these symbols for sameness and difference, they wanted to see if they can then use these to, or if this training would allow them to do the relational match to sample task. Right, so they actually used two tasks because they wanted to see if the animals could succeed in one and maybe not the other, or succeed in both. So they used a relational match to sample task and a regular match to sample task. The regular match to sample task is when they see just one single item as a sample, and then two items at the choice point, and they have to choose the matching one. In a relational matching task, as we saw, they see two objects as a sample, and then the choice point is four objects, and they have to choose the set of two that has the same relationship as the sample. So in the identity sample here, if they see two objects that are the same, they have to choose the two that are the same in the choice point, and on the right hand side, they see two objects that are the same, two objects that are different in the sample, and then at the choice point they have to choose the two objects that are different. So what they found is that the chimpanzees were able to match the relationships, but the monkeys were not. Right? So the black bars are the ones that describe their ability to match relations between relations. Right? That's their performance in the relational match to sample task. Remember, the chance would be 50%. Right? So they're guessing as to which set to choose at the choice point. And what we see is that the monkeys on the right, what's called here the conceptual match to sample, is what we mean by the relational match to sample. Here the monkeys are performing at chance, but the chimpanzees do much better than chance, 80% accuracy at choosing the matching relationship. In terms of matching single objects to single objects, both species did very well. Right? But the monkeys did not succeed in the relational match to sample task. So only chimpanzees succeeded on the relational match to sample task, and as I said, the monkeys performed at chance for the relational match to sample. In the regular match to sample task, which we've seen before, both species did very well. And they took this as evidence supporting the claim that monkeys and apes seem to differ in their cognitive abilities. Right? So for many years, for about a decade after this, people started to think that, well, that the big cognitive divide as far as primates is concerned is the divide between apes and monkeys. Right? The two sets of species diverged long ago, and higher cognitive abilities became kind of a characteristic of apes, and that includes humans, and that monkeys did not acquire these cognitive abilities. All right, so that's it.